A billionaire bride vanishes on her engagement night, only to be found crying on a bench by a single dad taxi driver. The truth behind her escape will shock you. The city looked different at night, especially when you were the one driving people home. That was how John Carter saw the world most days. Through the glowing reflections on his taxi windshield, through the laughter and arguments of late-night passengers, through the quiet moments when the roads finally emptied and only the hum of the engine kept him company. It had been a long shift, the kind that left his shoulders stiff and his back begging for rest. He was ready to call it a night, maybe grab a small snack for his son before heading home. But as he slowed near a dimly lit bus stop, something caught his attention. A shimmer of gold against the dull metal of the bench. At first he thought it was trash or someone's forgotten jacket, but then he saw movement. A woman sat hunched forward, hugging her knees, curls falling over her face like a curtain trying to hide her from the world. The streetlight flickered above her, throwing patches of shadow across her shoulders. Something about her posture pulled him in, the way someone looks when they're holding in too much pain and failing. John parked his taxi a few feet away and stepped out slowly so he wouldn't scare her. She didn't look up. She was trembling, not from cold he could tell, but from something much deeper. Her gown was expensive, the kind you only saw in magazines or storefronts he couldn't afford. A champagne gold dress, now wrinkled and stained, clinging to her like it had survived a storm. Her hair was long and wavy, once styled for a celebration, but now undone, strands sticking to her damp cheeks where tears had fallen. John cleared his throat softly. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked. His voice was genuine, gentle, the way he spoke to people on the edge of breaking. She lifted her head slightly, and he finally saw her face. Mascara streaked under her eyes, lips trembling. And the saddest part, not fear, just heartbreak so raw that it made his chest tighten. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking like she was afraid of her own words. "Don't take me back there." The line hit him like a cold wave. Take her back where? Who wanted her back? He looked around. No cars, no friends, no security, no one searching for a woman dressed like royalty. Something wasn't right. John crouched near her, but kept distance. "I don't need to take you anywhere except somewhere safe," he said. "Do you need a ride home?" She shook her head violently, then nodded, then wiped her face with shaking fingers. She was drunk. Not dangerously, but enough that her emotions were spilling out unchecked. Enough that she couldn't protect whatever she was running from. She stood up too quickly and her knees buckled. John caught her gently, guiding her to steady herself. Up close, he noticed faint jewelry on her wrist, the kind that looked custom-made. She didn't smell like someone who partied for fun. She smelled like someone who tried to run away from a celebration she didn't want to be a part of. "Where can I take you?" John asked again, soft but firm. She swallowed hard, staring at the quiet road as if expecting headlights to appear any second. "Anywhere but home," she whispered. "Please." He exhaled slowly, thinking of his son sleeping in their small apartment, thinking of how his night was supposed to end. But he couldn't leave her here, not like this, not with that kind of fear in her voice. "All right," he said finally. "Come with me. You can stay somewhere safe tonight." She let him guide her toward the taxi. Her steps were unsteady, but she didn't let go of his sleeve, holding it like a lifeline. When she settled in the back seat, she leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. Letting the city lights pass over her face, a tear slipped down her cheek. John watched her through the mirror, wondering who she was and what had broken her so deeply. But he didn't ask. Not tonight. He started the engine, and the taxi rolled forward. into the quiet streets carrying a woman who had run from something she couldn't face, and a man who had no idea just how much his life was about to change. When John finally pulled his taxi into the narrow parking lot outside his small apartment building, the woman in the back seat had quieted, though she wasn't asleep. She stared at the passing streetlights like she was trying to convince herself she hadn't made a mistake by trusting a stranger. John opened the door for her, careful not to startle her. She stepped out slowly, still holding the fabric of her gown with trembling fingers. The building wasn't much. 2 floors, cracked paint, a flickering hallway light, but it was safe, warm, and quiet, which was more than she seemed to have right now. As he unlocked the door to his apartment, he glanced at her again. Her eyes were tired, glassy, the kind of exhaustion that didn't come from the night, but from the weight of weeks or months of pressure. He didn't push her to talk. He just opened the door and motioned her inside. The apartment was small, but homey. A soft blanket draped over the couch, a pair of tiny shoes near the doorway, scattered crayons on the table, and a faint scent of vanilla that always lingered no matter how much he cleaned. It was the scent of a home lived in with love. She looked around with a strange mix of relief and disbelief, as if it had been a long time since she'd stepped into a place that felt human. "You can sit," John said quietly, setting his keys on the counter. She hovered near the couch like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to. Finally, she sat, shoulders curling in, hands still trembling slightly. He grabbed a soft blanket and draped it around her. She flinched at the contact, then relaxed into the warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice small but sincere. He gave her a nod and moved toward the kitchenette to make tea. He wasn't a man who knew how to fix broken hearts, but he could at least offer warmth. As the kettle clicked on, a soft sound came from the hallway bedroom, the small thump of feet hitting the floor. A door opened, and his 7-year-old son Daniel emerged with sleep in his eyes and his hair sticking up like a miniature storm had passed over him. "Daddy!" he murmured. Then he spotted the woman on the couch. His eyes widened, not with fear, but curiosity. He rubbed his eyes again, stared, then took a hesitant step forward. "Why is Auntie crying?" The woman blinked, startled by the small voice. She wiped her eyes quickly, trying to hide her tears. Daniel walked closer, his little feet padding across the floor. He didn't ask who she was, or why she looked so sad. His heart didn't need explanations to feel empathy. Instead, he held up the small green dinosaur toy he took everywhere. It was missing some paint, a little worn, but still his favorite. "Here," he said softly, placing it in her hand. "He scares monsters. You can borrow him." She stared at the toy like it was a treasure handed from a king. Then her face crumpled, and for the first time since John had found her, she cried without holding back. Not the frantic kind from earlier, but soft, heavy tears that carried exhaustion, heartbreak, and gratitude all at once. Daniel climbed onto the couch beside her, not too close, just enough to show he was there. She looked at him with a fragile smile. "Thank you," she whispered. John watched from the kitchenette, his heart tightening at the sight. He had seen adults step on each other's emotions without a second thought, yet here was his son offering the most valuable thing he owned, simply because he saw someone hurting. The kettle clicked off, breaking the silence. John poured tea into a mug and walked it over to her. "Drink this," he said gently. "It'll help you feel better." She accepted it with both hands, still holding the dinosaur like it was a lifeline. As she sipped, warmth, color returned to her cheeks. She looked up at John with a hesitant expression, as if she wanted to explain something, but didn't know how. He didn't push her. Instead, he sat on the opposite chair and waited. After a long moment, she whispered, "I'm sorry for showing up like this. I couldn't stay there tonight." Her voice cracked again, and she set her cup down carefully. Daniel leaned against her arm, yawning softly. It made her smile faintly, something small, fragile, but real. "You don't owe me an explanation," John said softly. "You're safe here. That's all that matters." For the first time that night, she closed her eyes and breathed out a long, shaky breath, like she was finally letting go of something she'd been holding for too long. And in that quiet moment, John realized this wasn't just a stranger he helped. This was someone with a story heavy enough to break anyone, and somehow fate had guided her to his doorstep. Morning came quietly, slipping through the thin curtains of John's apartment and casting soft light across the small living room. For a moment, the world inside felt peaceful. Daniel snoring softly on the couch, after insisting on staying near the sad auntie, the faint hum of traffic outside, and the warm scent of tea lingering from last night. But that fragile calm didn't last long. John woke up early, as he always did, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders before heading into the kitchen. He glanced toward the couch and saw the woman, still wrapped in the blanket, still holding Daniel's dinosaur in her sleep. She looked peaceful now, nothing like the terrified, exhausted person he found on the bench. Her breathing was steady, her hair spread across the pillow, traces of last night's tears dried on her cheeks. He didn't know her name yet, and he didn't ask. Something told him she wasn't ready to share it. He stepped outside to grab milk from the small shop at the corner. The morning air was crisp, the kind that wakes you up better than coffee. He nodded at the shopkeeper, bought what he needed, and as he walked back, he noticed a group of people crowding around a man holding his phone out, talking excitedly. Normally, he wouldn't care. People gathered around gossip and rumors all the time. But then he heard a name, sharp, urgent, chilling. Zara Knight. He froze for half a second. Everyone in the city knew that name. The youngest billionaire CEO in the country. Headlines loved her, magazines obsessed over her style, her empire, her perfect life. But the tone in people's voices wasn't admiration, it was panic. She went missing last night, disappeared during her engagement party. Another person added, her fiancé's offering a reward, the whole city searching for her. John felt his heartbeat kick up. Missing? Engagement party. Last night? Champagne gown? Tears? Fear? It clicked together with a cold, heavy clarity. The woman sleeping on his couch wasn't just someone who had a bad night, she was Zara Knight, a literal billionaire whose disappearance was now plastered on every screen and every news alert. He hurried back to the apartment, his mind spinning. When he walked in, she was awake, not panicked, just sitting on the couch with her hands wrapped around Daniel's dinosaur, like she'd been waiting for something to happen. Daniel was beside her, half asleep, rubbing his eyes. She looked up at John with a softness that faded the moment she saw his face. He didn't have to say a word. She knew. Her expression shifted into something fragile and terrified. He placed the milk on the counter, then slowly walked toward her. "You're Zara Knight," he said quietly. It wasn't an accusation. It was just the truth. She swallowed hard, her eyes glossing again. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "Don't call them." Daniel looked between them, confused, but sensing the tension. John took a slow breath, trying to hold back the dozen questions burning in his mind. "You disappeared last night. The whole city is looking for you." She nodded, pressing the dinosaur against her chest like she needed its plastic bravery. She gave him a watery smile. "I didn't plan to disappear," she whispered. "I just wanted to escape for a moment, clear my head. But then everything felt too big, and I didn't know where to go." John understood more than he expected to. He had never lived in her world, not even close. But fear, pressure, and desperation, those he knew. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "No one knows you're here." She exhaled shakily, like she'd been holding her breath since last night. But the moment broke when John's phone buzzed. A news alert lit up the screen. Another headline. Another photo of her smiling at her engagement party, wearing the same gown she now wore like a burden. He put the phone face down. She stared at him, fear flickering across her features. "You're not turning me in, right?" He met her eyes. "Unless you want me to." Her tears fell again, silent, but full of relief. In that tiny apartment, the world felt far away, yet dangerously close. And John knew things were about to become much more complicated than he ever imagined. The day unfolded slowly, every hour stretching longer than usual as Zara settled quietly into the rhythm of John's small apartment. After the shock of seeing the headlines and admitting who she really was, the atmosphere between them changed, not into something awkward, but into something heavier, something unspoken. John spent the morning fixing a wobbly cabinet door that had been bothering him for months, partly because it needed repairing, and partly because it gave him something to focus on besides the billionaire sitting on his couch clutching his son's toy dinosaur like it was a shield. Zara watched him silently for a long time, knees pulled to her chest, hair loosely tied back with a borrowed hairband she had found in the bathroom. She looked like someone trying to make herself small, trying not to take up space in a life that wasn't hers. Yet she didn't leave. Not even when the world outside buzzed louder with news updates, not when her phone vibrated nonstop with calls from names she didn't want to see, not when the sunlight brightened, reminding her that reality would eventually crash through the walls of John's small world. Instead, she stayed right there, quiet, still, fragile, but strangely grounded. Around noon, John noticed she hadn't eaten anything, so he asked gently, "Are you hungry?" She blinked, like she had forgotten hunger existed. I I think so," she said. Her voice was soft, still carrying the leftover tremor of fear. "I can make something," John offered. "Or we can order in." "No," she interrupted quickly, almost panicked. "No ordering, no deliveries, no one should know where I am." The desperation in her voice reminded him that she wasn't just hiding, she was scared of being found. So he nodded and cooked something simple, scrambled eggs and toasted bread. As he cooked, she wandered toward the kitchen, drawn by the soft sizzle and the warm smell. She watched him move around the cramped counter like it was second nature. "You do all this yourself?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," he said, glancing at her with a half-smile. "Single dad routine. You learn fast or you starve." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that looked like it had been hiding for too long. Danielle soon joined them, shuffling out of his room in his dinosaur pajamas, hair sticking up in every direction. He climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs and yawned loud enough to make both adults laugh. Zara instinctively reached out to fix his messy hair. He leaned into her hand without hesitation, and the tenderness of that simple moment softened something inside her. When they sat down to eat, it didn't feel strange or forced. Zara ate slowly, savoring each bite as if she hadn't tasted something warm and homemade in a long time. Danielle talked animatedly about his favorite cartoons, and she listened like the stories mattered more than any corporate meeting or financial report. John watched her from time to time, noticing how she relaxed inch by inch. She even laughed, a soft, surprised sound that seemed to brighten the whole room. When they finished eating, she stood up and started collecting plates. "You don't have to do that," John said. "You're a guest." "I don't want to just sit and take up your space. Let me help." There was something raw and honest in the way she said it that made him step back and let her. After dishes were washed and the kitchen was tidy again, she walked into the living room and noticed the clutter, scattered crayons, toy cars, a blanket thrown over the couch. Instead of ignoring it, she picked up the crayons and began placing them in a small container. Then she folded the blanket neatly. Then she swept the floor. It wasn't because she felt obligated, it was because this was the first place in a long time where she wasn't performing, wasn't being watched, wasn't expected to be perfect. She was just helpful, human. John leaned against the doorway, watching her with a small, thoughtful smile. "You don't have to clean the whole place, you know." She looked up at him, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "It feels good," she admitted quietly, "doing normal things." A beat of silence passed between them, warm and unexpected. Danielle came running in, holding up his dinosaur. "Auntie, look, he's brave today." She crouched down and smiled. "Is he? Maybe because he knows he's protecting both of us." Danielle nodded proudly and wrapped his arms around her. For a moment she froze, then she closed her eyes and hugged him back, letting the small boy's warmth ground her in a way her mansion never could. And in that tiny apartment, surrounded by cracked paint and second-hand furniture, Zara Knight, the billionaire everyone was hunting for, felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Belonging. A reason not to leave. The next morning began with a heavy silence, the kind that felt like the pause before a storm. Zara had slept on the couch again, wrapped in the same blanket, her breathing soft and steady. John made breakfast quietly, while Danielle drew pictures on the floor, humming to himself. Every now and then, John glanced at Zara, wondering how long she could hide from the world before it came crashing through his front door. And though he didn't want to admit it, part of him feared this peaceful bubble they had built was already beginning to shrink. Outside, the noise of the city seemed louder than usual, cars honking, distant sirens, footsteps echoing in the hallway. Reporters had begun spreading across neighborhoods, knocking on doors, interviewing strangers, asking if anyone had seen the missing billionaire bride. John knew it was only a matter of time before one of them ended up here. By midday, Zara was sitting on the couch flipping through channels, only to turn off the TV each time her own face appeared on the screen. Her engagement photo flashed across nearly every news station, her smiling in her elegant gown next to the fiancé she could barely tolerate. But the expression on her face in the picture didn't look like her, not the woman sitting here. That woman was polished, poised, perfect. This one was real, scared, hopeful, fragile, and somehow stronger for it. Suddenly there came a knock on the door, sharp, loud, authoritative, not the kind of knock neighbors made. Zara froze, her breath hitched. Daniel looked up from his drawings, clutching his dinosaur. John's heart slammed against his ribs. He motioned for Zara to stay behind the couch and took a careful step toward the door. He wasn't sure what waited on the other side: police, reporters, her security team, or something worse. The knock came again. "Open the door, please. We need to speak with you." It was a firm voice, someone used to being obeyed. John opened the door a small crack, just enough to see who it was. Two men in suits stood outside, flanked by a woman with a clipboard and a nervous expression. Behind them, a crowd of reporters was already gathering at a distance, cameras lifted, microphones outstretched, lights flashing. The hallway filled with noise the moment they spotted movement. "Sir, we're looking for Zara Knight," the woman said quickly. "We have reason to believe she may be in this area." John kept his expression calm. "What makes you think that?" The man beside her stepped forward. "We've tracked her last known movements. Her phone pinged near this neighborhood before going offline. We're checking every apartment." Zara's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't stay hidden forever, not with the world searching like this. Before John could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "John, it's okay." Zara forced herself to stand, her legs trembling, but her eyes steady. She moved toward the door with slow, deliberate steps. When the suited team saw her, their faces filled with relief and alarm at the same time. The reporters shouted. Camera lights flashed harshly. The suited men tried to shield her, but Zara held up a hand. "Stop!" And they froze. She turned back toward John, who stood behind her, with protective tension in his shoulders. Daniel peeked out from behind his legs, clutching his dinosaur. John met Zara's eyes for a moment that felt longer than it was, an unspoken thank you, a quiet promise she would never forget what he had done for her. Then she looked at the crowd and lifted her chin. "I'll speak to the press later. For now, I need space." The assistant nodded quickly, guiding her away while the cameras followed her like a flock of hungry birds. As she stepped into the hallway, she turned one last time, giving John a soft, grateful smile. He watched silently, feeling the weight of the moment settle into his chest. The world had found her, but a piece of her heart remained behind in that small apartment, with a taxi driver and a boy who had handed her a toy dinosaur when she needed it most. The days that followed were a strange mix of chaos and quiet, like two different worlds pulling at Zara from opposite directions. Outside, the media storm grew louder. News anchors analyzing her every move, paparazzi camping outside the Knight Enterprises building, and her former fiancé giving stiff, carefully worded interviews about concern for her well-being. Inside John's apartment, however, life moved at a pace she had never known before, a gentle, human pace. She wasn't staying there anymore. Of course she couldn't, not with the cameras swarming the neighborhood after the discovery, but she found herself returning every chance she got. Not publicly, not openly. Her security team thought she was staying at a safe house somewhere across the city. In reality, she kept slipping quietly into John's apartment with a hood over her head and her heart beating faster than it had during any press conference. The first time she came back after being found, John opened the door with surprise in his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you," he said, though the softness in his voice betrayed how relieved he was. Zara stepped inside, exhaling like she had been holding her breath for days. "I didn't know where else to go," she admitted. "Everywhere else feels loud." John nodded. "It's loud out there," he said, "but you don't have to talk about any of that here." And she didn't, at least not at first. Instead, she joined Daniel at the small kitchen table where he proudly showed her his drawings, mostly dinosaurs. One looked suspiciously like her, wearing a crown while riding a T-Rex. She laughed, really laughed, and something inside her softened in a way she hadn't felt in years. The apartment became her escape, her reset button, the one place where she didn't have to be the CEO with a flawless public image. Here she was just Zara, the woman who had run away from a life that suffocated her. When she helped John cook dinner one evening, she accidentally chopped the onions all wrong. When she tried folding laundry, she folded Daniel's shirts like luxury boutique display pieces. And when she burned the toast, she looked at John with an embarrassed smile he never wanted to forget. Slowly, quietly, the home began to feel like hers too, not because she lived there, but because they let her be herself inside it. One evening, as the sun dipped lower and painted the tiny living room in honey-colored light, Zara stood by the window, looking out at the city she had once ruled with confidence. She held a mug of tea in her hands, the steam brushing her face. "Do you think someone like me can ever have a normal life?" she asked softly. John stood beside her, drying a plate with a towel. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I don't think you need a normal life. You just need a life that feels like yours." She let his words sink in, her eyes softening. "This, being here, it feels like mine." There was no confession, no dramatic music swelling, just two people standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched, two quiet breaths mingling in the warm air. Daniel broke the moment by running in holding his dinosaur above his head. "Auntie Zara, he learned a new roar!" She laughed, scooped Daniel up and spun him gently in a circle. John watched them, a small smile tugging at his lips. For a man who had lived through loneliness, through struggles, through nights where everything felt heavier than he could carry, this moment felt like light. Over the next few weeks, Zara made the biggest decisions of her life. She called off the engagement officially, not through her PR team, but through a personal statement she insisted on writing herself. She took a temporary step back from Knight Enterprises, telling her board she needed time to breathe, to think, to rebuild parts of her life she had ignored for too long. The world reacted with shock, speculation, criticism, admiration, everything you'd expect when a billionaire broke the script written for her. But Zara didn't crumble under the noise anymore. She had found a place to balance herself. A quiet apartment with cracked walls and warm lights, a little boy with a toy dinosaur who believed she could fight monsters, and a man who had given her safety without asking for anything in return. One night, as they cleaned up after dinner, she looked at John with a gentle smile. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving me in ways you don't even realize." He shook his head. "You weren't broken. You were just tired of pretending." She stepped closer, close enough that the warmth between them felt unmistakable. "Maybe," she whispered, "but being here, being with you, it's the first time I've felt free in years." And in that tiny kitchen, surrounded by dishes and crayons and quiet gratitude, Zara Knight, who had once run from a life built on money and power, found a different kind of freedom, one that felt real, one that felt like home. If you enjoyed this emotional ride, make sure you hit subscribe and follow Drew Daily Stories for more heart-touching stories, dramatic twists, and unforgettable characters. Your support helps bring the next story to life.